Hello, and welcome to the Future Shapers podcast, brought to you by the Spaceship.ai. My name is Tod Gimbel. I'm your host. I'm one of the co-founders of the Spaceship, and I am extremely pleased today to have one of our Spaceship fellows with us. In fact, one of the first that we brought on board, Daniel Huard. Daniel is coming to us from Las Vegas, Nevada. I am here in not so warm California today in Southern California. But Daniel, welcome to the Future Shapers podcast. How are you doing today?
I learn something every day, and I have a quest to keep learning. And the alignment with me and what I do and the Spaceship started several years ago when Todd and I first connected, and we collaborated on some projects together. So between Todd, Craig, and myself, we have a great respect for the people we work with. We want to make sure that we not only solve their problems, but help inspire some positive, lasting change. Now, background on Daniel, I'm a mechanical engineer, architect, urban planner, project management professional, lead fellow, have another 14 licenses in and around building science. And I'm known as the godfather of sustainability. Didn't name myself that. I'm honored to have gotten that moniker from people who felt good about it. I guess the other stuff I'll touch down on is a lot of the stuff that I do is really early in the carbon world, doing third-party investment grade audits and analyses to prove improvements to facilities, and then document those savings that the entity would get back to a financial institution to prove the validity of that investment. And then also document how many megawatts were saved as a result of it. So abatement, renewable energy, and then finally forestry and agriculture related to carbon, I've managed to get involved in over the last numerous years and do so again today.
So the thing I love about that, and thank you for the intro, and I concur, we've done a couple projects together, and honestly, we couldn't have done them without your expertise. And the thing I love about what you do is that, we have a lot of people who have like a very small slice of the sustainability puzzle. They may do sustainable tourism, they may do sustainable this or that, and those are great. You're kind of a guy who looks at holistically at an system from like before you start to like build a building to that end of that building's life, whether the building or spaces already exist. And you look at everything, how they work, what the systems are, and kind of figure out how those places can be a smaller footprint, how they can use fewer resources, how they can maximize resource use in a way that doesn't increase their carbon footprint and everything. It's amazing. So maybe walk us through a little bit about how you look at a situation. For example, if someone wants to take an office building that was built in 1975 and make it more efficient and update it and retrofit it. What kind of things do you look at when you're taking on a project like that?
Yeah, I'm going to just share one other thing where I think our commonality really connected us, and that's facilitation. So versus, trying to design something and have that ego portion of it, we as a group with Spaceship, we're all working on facilitating to get the best, most holistic, complete solution for our clients. So when we take a building, for example, and look at it, we go back and do that, what I just shared, a level 3 audit on it, for example. So we go look at how efficient is the building? How efficient is its central plant, its HVAC systems? Does it have building controls? How efficient or inefficient is the building's envelope? What other issues does it have that are negative? What issues does it have that are unhealthy, if you will? And then we go back and look at how do you address these as priorities? And we do it with the clients. We share our findings with the clients and then look at defining where your best ROIs are, but where the positive contributors are going to be to the occupants of the building, which is kind of atypical for the way some people would approach it. Some would just look at how can I save electrical energy and forget that you have several other resources that you need to do. So at the end of the day, as an example, there's a project that we did where we improved the building envelope, improved the daylighting, enhanced circadian rhythm, put in energy controls and new lighting, corresponded the lighting controls with daylighting sensors so that we use less energy, brought in more efficient lighting, improved that building's envelope, installed mechanical system pieces that improved not only the efficiency to get heating, cooling, air conditioning, but also higher levels of filtration. And then we were able to do, 179D, that tax credit that you can apply for, gets you 60 cents a square foot when you improve the building's envelope, when you improve the lighting and lighting controls, plug loads, and the building's HVAC system. So, it was, 3 hits on that one to get all that. And then, the amalgamate ROI that we ended up in that project was something like 2.9, 3.1 years. But what was really outstanding is the gain in productivity. So we weren't looking to see that a bunch of productivity fell to the bottom line. It was a nicer and a more sustainable and a much more accommodating facility with much better indoor environmental conditions for the occupants. Their sick days went way down.
Interesting.
All
Let
those
me interrupt you
attributes,
for one.
sort of compounded to improve the environment. And the
Yeah,
resultant was a really great, successful project.
so you raised something really interesting that I learned from working with you, and that is the desire to make a place more efficient, smaller footprint, less energy use, wiser use of energy, crossover from one system to another system. Not only is it a money saver and it's good for the environment, but it ends up being great for the people who are working in that space or living in that space. So if I am an employee of a big company and that's back in their offices and I have a comfortable space and the lighting's good and there's natural light and there's plants and there's this and there's that and the systems are good so that I'm not too hot and I'm not too cold, I'm going to be a better worker, I'm going to be a happier worker. And oh, by the way, it's also a more efficient system, it's saving money and it's helping the planet. So those things kind of can be reconciled, and I learned that from you. Tell me a little bit more about.
Yeah, so I'll do it by starting with, the aspirations that I do, that we do, is to see stuff that's restorative, regenerative, and increased in wellness. If we can accomplish those things, the discussion around carbon is already done. It's already taken care of for us because we've done the maximum we could restorative. We've done the maximum we could regenerative. And in combination, you touched down on biophilia and a couple of other things that we do that are inherently better for wellness, including activity. Put the elevator when you enter a building. The last thing I want to see in a well-designed building is an elevator as soon as I walk in the doors. I want a stairwell. I want to see an opportunity for experiencing the space and feeling the space versus I'm not opposed to conveyance and an elevator by any means. But that shouldn't be the first thing that we see walking in. And I'll go back to a small project that we did in Shanghai, where we did a project that was net positive energy and net positive water in Shanghai, China. We did this project and we were doing the 12-month proving period on the project to get it fully certified. And during that period of time, we saw our net zero energy, we were failing. We were a little bit short on energy. We're a couple of kilowatts away, 1.9 or 2.1 kW away. We looked at all of our calcs and everything else, and we saw that all of that stuff worked out. We had planned in a 6% overage in the renewable energy supply for the facility. Comes back to Daniel, how do we solve this? What's wrong? Where are we wrong? Go back and look at it. So I started looking at the meter data. We go back and double back on where the energy is being used, what time of day it's being used, etc. And we're seeing computer servers at 2 and 4 in the morning active. How are they active at 2 and 4 in the morning? We made a building that the people in the building love so much, they'd pack a duffel bag and stay there 1 or 2 nights a week. They'd stay there. So ultimately, I was the bad guy in saying that we had to institute and have everybody sign off on the liability and make the maximum time a day that you could stay there is 14 hours. And in an emergency situation, the general manager of the facility designated as emergency you could be 16 and 1/2 hours maximum. And that could only apply to a maximum of 25% of the staff.
Interesting.
So I was the bad guy. I had to tell people that I know you love what we did, but you can't live here. You've got to go home.
Well, interesting because earlier in my career, when I first moved to Asia, I was doing a lot of work in China. And similar issue, I remember the guy who was in charge of our China business. The first time I visited, I was there and we were going to go to dinner or something. And it was like 6 o'clock and we were ready to leave. And like everybody was still working, these young people. I said, what's up with that? And he said, well, and this was years ago. It's changed a little bit since. But he said, most young people in China, they live with their parents in very small apartments until they get married and until they move on with their lives. And they'd much rather be in a beautiful office that's comfortable and that's got all the amenities that they want than go back home in their tiny little room and stuff. So that has been it's a China cultural and social China. It's probably changed since then. To your point, you made it even better because you made it not just desirable for them to stay because it was better than where they were living, but it was probably even way better in the sense that they had space and comfort. And to your point, all the different things that you had worked into upgrading that space. And it made them want to be there because that was the place they were most comfortable. And they probably were very productive too, because when they're there, they're working.
Yeah, and, we touching down on the water utility, it was so bizarre because we designed in a net zero water system that was sort of a little bit inspired by the Bullitt Center, the very first Living Building Challenge project that was built speculative in Seattle. So we ended up with a net zero or net positive water system in reality, where we captured the precipitation, treated it without chemicals, without chlorine, and developed the potable water. But then we captured the gray and the black water and treated that as well. And reutilize that for other purposes like flush valves, irrigation purposes. And then at the very end of it all, we recharge the local aquifer. So imagine the whole idea of you being somewhere, the rainfall is falling, it's benefiting the planet where it falls. We did the exact same thing, except for we used the water on the way through and potentially added nutrients to it so it could recharge the aquifer by taking out a waste treatment plant. So it's that kind of stuff where we can do stuff that's restorative and regenerative that you first shake your head on, and then all of a sudden, wait a minute. We had a septic system at our cottage where I grew up. That did the same thing. So it's not something new. We've just taken that technology and optimized the delivery of that so that we're able to compact it and use it at a larger scale, scaled it up and scaled abilities up to make it more purposeful for different size facilities.
That's fascinating. So there's probably new tech, there's old tech, there's small tech that when you maximize it or enhance it, it's not like you have to reinvent something every time you look at these things. There's probably so when you look at an overall system and integrate into it your thoughts on all the different things, regenerative and et cetera, how do you, and you have all these degrees, so you have a lot of good background. Is it as simple as you just saying, okay, I got to put all these different hats on to think of the different systems and put together the best for what makes sense for now? What is your kind of process for figuring out, hey, you just got a project, you're looking at a place. How do you do you have a checklist? How do you go through it to kind of just start and figure out where you want to get it to?
Yeah. So first, when we do any green building project, we typically start with owner's project requirements, trying to find out what the owner, the key stakeholder needs to have. But then what I like to do that's not necessarily contrary to that, I think it's complementary to that, is to put on that hat and be master facilitator. So problem seek with those people, dialogue a little more with them and saying, I'd like, more efficient operation. I'd like more predictable operation, and I'd like better air quality. Okay, those are all going to be common things we get asked for. And the stuff that you standard do on everything is going to be always applicable. Do we look at, do you have lighting control in your facility or no? What type of windows do you have? Have you sealed the windows and doors? Have you got all these little things that we do in a level 1 audit that's our typical low cost to no cost things that we can improve? And it's as simple as when you leave the room, do you turn the lights off?
Right.
And we'll help the owner in doing surveys on that to help change the mindset of where your impact is. Because we take the results of the survey and then present an educational document to the occupants of the facility to let them know that somewhere between 10 and 20% of typical energy use in a facility is occupant controllable. They can improve it on their own that much. It's just being mindful. But in that problem seeking thing, helping the owners ferret out some of these things, and it's not directed at an individual in the facility, it's directed at trying to bring a much more holistic solution to the plate than, single things. So we tend to not, like a good friend of mine, Mr. Rodwell from London, he's got his house in a former grain silo. And it was, just a little 4-story high grain silo, and he's in the basement, but it's a round room. So he thinks of things instead of a pyramidal hierarchy to more of a round table hierarchy, that we're all contributing. We all have something to place in a solution. And even though he's a CEO, he hates that term. He wants to say that, no, I'm like you. I'm a board of directors member, just like you. And, I only may be here to be the facilitator or the note taker. Now imagine you have a CEO that says that to you, that I'm here as
Right.
the note taker and facilitator. But when we look at a strategic plan, right, the goal of somebody who's a CEO is to try and simplify stuff to work breakdown structure. I need people, I need resources, and I need time to get whatever it is accomplished. And if you distill it down to that point, it's much easier. So we basically help instill some of these things into the dialogue with that building owner that wants to engage and either build a new building, or we have a big opportunity to reduce carbon impact by improving an existing building. And, you see some LEED stuff on the wall here behind me. And, I'm one of the acknowledged authors or contributing authors, to LEED version 4, LEED version 4.1, and the now out for ballot LEED version 5. And in all of that stuff, we don't rely on just energy efficiency. We have stuff related to the community at large. We have the location credits, we have the site credits, we have the energy credits, we have the materials credit, we have the indoor environmental quality credits, so that it's not one leg you can stand on. And we know we can balance things with a 3-legged stool. But if we really want to succeed, I like that round table analogy that Dan brought. And, he's got this idea that, the limitation of the number of people contributing or the chairs at the table is really on what abilities are we missing. If we need another expert to solve this thing, then we need to add another chair. So it's a really different way to go about approaching it from you've only got one person at the top. And if that person at the top realizes that they're there not to be the figurehead, but to be the motivator and the facilitator for the organization's success, then we succeed. Basically, I'm there to coach them on, let's take that idea of how are you a good CEO and how do you execute a good strategic plan? Let's apply that to your facility. And all of a sudden, the light goes on. And they're like, wow, Daniel, never thought of it that way. I'm like, well, now imagine if we were to do the biggest expense you have in your building. What is it? And they're like, well, obviously our energy bill's the biggest, and, maybe taxes a second. I'm like, what do the occupants cost you? And all of a sudden you get glazed eyes, and then one of these, oh my God, you're right. 96% of the cost is the people who occupy the facility. And I don't mean that as 96% of the cost as a burden, because they bring everything that you need back for you to make money, right?
Yeah, they
have
bring
a
the value,
right? That's how you make your profit, right? Or that's how you sustain your business. And hopefully we see your business in a manner where it's not just borderline sustainable, where it's very potentially regenerative and growing, where you develop talent and you develop the next phase of talent to come in behind them. So I guess, and I apologize if it seems like I'm being divergent, not at all. What it is everything's associated. And then all of a sudden that facilitation of problem seeking helps us say, what can we do with our building to help facilitate this? What can we do to our building to help do this? And, you help instill operational protocols beyond just the green building attributes that save you resources, so that they operate more effectively, more humane. I've got to get that word in, more humane, because Once you do it more effectively, more human focused, wellness starts to follow. And you know that I'm a well building institute AP and a member of their faculty. So that's stuff I'm deeply engaged in and deeply believing in, and have been for a decade, have been a little more than a decade leading a charge for them as well. So now we've got a bunch of pieces that were not in the original owner's project requirements. Daniel, how do we incorporate these? Because we see they're important. Then the last thing that I let them know is that let's make sure that we have this defensible with ROIs. Now, one element may cost us money, but in grand total, we need to see a positive fiscal benefit from what we're doing. We need to see an ROI. Once you're considerate enough, that is going to inherently fall into place for us.
Sure, sure. Well, and the toughest nut to crack in all of sustainability practice, regardless of what it is we're doing these things because we should be doing them. They're the right thing to do. It's good for the planet. It's good for humanity. But we're also in a society where it's a people want to make money, and people are not going to spend $1 million to do something when at the end of the day they're not going to bring in more than $1 million to compensate for what they've spent. So their investments. So when you can match up return on investment to make sure that doing these things, which are the right thing to do, are also a good return on your investment, voila, you got it. And I think people like you and others are now much more focused on that, especially in light of some of the crazy stuff that's going on in politics around the world, that at the end of the day, if you can do good and also help those who are, trying to get jobs and make profit and blah, 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 it's a win-win.
Yeah, definitely.
And what this leads me to is, and it reminds me of the project that we did. So you talked about meeting with the CEO, who is more of a facilitator, or it can be the head of the whoever's managing the building, all of the people who are responsible for the things you're going to do or you're going to suggest that they do. But another huge piece, and this is where the Daniel meshing with the spaceship works, is the more all of the users and people who are going to occupy that building have an education on the what's, the wherefores, and the whys, and the hows, boom, then the education piece is big. So talk a little bit about the education piece when you're doing your work. How important is that, and how has that evolved into, as opposed to just getting a memo saying, hey, starting tomorrow the lights are going to work on their own, thank you very much. You want to give people context, right?
Yeah, I'll go all the way back in, I worked for a major utility, Las Vegas Valley Water District at Southern Nevada Water Authority as project executive years ago. And somehow I got dragged into supplier diversity committee with them. And I'm like, I'm not sure why I got appointed to this. If it's an assignment, I'm going to do my best that I can do at it. What was really interesting is we put together these presentations to make sure that WMBE firms, minority business, had a chance to participate in what we were doing. And we were a geopolitical entity. So we put together a theory on it, and they're like, Daniel, we love your idea on this to be inclusive. And I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, you're considering both the needs of the services provider and the consumables provider, along with our needs, and how do we work together? Because you never want to get handcuffed to a single source. Typically, you want to be able to have a contingency. Anyways, our program got to be so well regarded that the whole county, all of Southern Nevada, had a situation where they said, can you come and present? So we did a thing where it was like question and answer, and it was amazing because all of these entities just wanted to not only do their job, but they wanted to see their customer happy and satisfied. How do we do that? Well, we exceed in helping them solve their problems. So we did the supplier diversity thing to give them best practices in replying to an RFP. Was it out of the realm of what we first started doing?
Right.
Perhaps.
Right.
But at the end of the day, they're like, Daniel, how do I incorporate this lead stuff? How do I do this? How do I do that? And it was a matter of, so Daniel puts on educational seminars on circular economy, on satisfying material resources requirements in lead projects. Next thing you know, we've got contractors wanting to attend. Next thing you know, we got builders and GCs wanting to attend. And you know, it was just one of those things where you started off with an intent to be collaborative, and then all of a sudden it moved into how can you positively impact the whole process. And I ended up winning this award for the best contributor to supplier diversity in 2009. I know that's a long time ago, but at the same time, it's pretty cool. And then next
Yeah.
thing you know, members of the Senate saying, "What I heard that you're up to something, and I wasn't made aware of it." And you're like, somebody from the senator's office, and you're like, "Well, we didn't do anything to upset the senator or anything, did we?" And they're, no, exactly the opposite. People are talking about how good the stuff was, and you weren't focused on supporting one district or one political entity or another. And I started chuckling. I'm like, anybody who knows me knows that I'm a citizen of the planet first, and I'm mostly apolitical. I'm mostly centrist. And it was so funny because I actually was project executive for a project, building a museum for the state of Nevada, and I was like the guy reporting to the legislature every couple of weeks. And it was simply because that ability to relate on a bunch of different levels was something that I was capable of doing for that audience. But I was also the guy who was able to communicate in a supplier diversity program to help set the seed for circular economy, set the seed for sustainability, set the seed that you too are active and involved in this, set the seed for you are a major contributor to this, even though your company is battery surplus or battery supplier or something of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
So there was you and I both know that from your vast work in a variety of industries, when you can't operate a building, right? You can't have a place if you don't have soap, right? What do you do if you have no hand towels? These are all things we don't think of initially, but at the same time, they're crucial in, that supply chain needs to be solid so that you can operate. And it was basically setting up a program for people to understand there's no thing in that supply chain that you could do without. If you could do without it, it wasn't in your supply chain.
Right. And if it's in your supply chain, there is probably a way to examine it and look at the whole piece of that supply chain to see how does that soap get to you, and which soap should I be buying based on how the soap company is developing it, sourcing it, manufacturing it. What are their policies? What are their practices? The whole nine yards. So that the whole system is outrageously complex.
This is why, hopefully the viewers of Spaceship start to realize that we're not silos, right? We're all interconnected. And that's what Spaceship does. We bring a whole bunch of people who are capable in so many different things to help you with those considerations, or to be supportive and to help you build your success.
Yeah. And to understand it and to go from maybe not even knowing it exists to knowing it exists, to understanding it, to paying attention, to then kind of becoming aware and an advocate for circularity, sustainability. Let's say the building you did in Shanghai or any of the other ones that you've worked on. Ultimately, everybody in there, you want to be some kind of an ambassador for continuing the process of making the place better. And what better people to be those carriers and those people who raise their hand than the people who occupy the place and work there and say, you know what, you did this, and I'm wondering now, do we need this, or is this system right? Or or hey, I notice we're sourcing, our tables from the other side of the world. Is there a better way to source tables from closer by that are made more sustainably? And by the way, what are we doing at the end of the day when something gets worn out? Are we throwing it into the landfill? Do we have a process for rebuilding? All those different parts of the system. The more people that are aware and engaged and understanding, I think the better you are at being able to live through, all the good things you're trying to make happen.
Yeah, it completely concur. The whole idea of, and you've heard me speak on life cycle assessment, the whole idea that, you know, consider rate the very initiation, if there's a need for something, where the impact starts. And the impact starts as soon as you've identified the need for something, because you need
Yeah.
those resources, those raw materials to create that thing. And we go through all the stage, and what most people don't get is through the LCA process, we get to the in-use phase. And it's great we're in the in-use phase. At the end of the in-use phase is where our real successes and circularity occur, right? Instead of it going into a landfill. And I'll throw props to the, National Park Service. Did a project with them, and it's like, Daniel, we need to make sure we don't have a bunch of these materials just going straight to a landfill. And they're like, is it too aspiring to say that we want to divert 60%? And I'm like, yeah. And then, the contractor who I was working for were like, and I'm like, no, we can do this. Well, we end up diverting almost 58,000 tons of materials, that we identified, roadway construction, that we're going to need something similar to what we had. And they were able to process these materials for less money than going to, a pit to get gravel or crushed stone. They were able to process the materials we had for less money than those. So we had a savings and increased profit for them, processing it on site locally, saving the taxpayer over $4 million in landfill fees for those materials.
That's amazing. And that's
and then generating, in the abated carbon, generating something like $480,000 in carbon credits.
so, I mean, back to your point earlier, you save 4 million in landfill,
Taxpayer
and
dollars.
the taxpayers are paying that. You're saving money on the materials, you're saving here and there. And at the end of the day, the task, the thing they're trying to get done is still getting done. And the parks are still there, the projects are still being completed, and nobody is complaining and saying, I liked it better when you did these projects and threw all this stuff in the landfill, because people don't even notice that ever happened, or if it's not happening.
So at that point in time, I was told, and I didn't have a fact checker on me, but I was told it was the most effective project ever for the Fed government for diversion purposes. 93.68% diversion.
And one of the things that I think that is lacking sometimes is, you do a great project like that and you know about it, the people you work with know about it. I'm not sure in this one because I don't know the details of it, but one of the more important things that we kind of sometimes take for granted is like putting the word out there, like through communications, through education projects that get more and more people on board and say, you know what, I was never a big environmental guy, I don't care, but wow, it actually is saving me money, it's saving me tax dollars, and my services are, my experience going to the parks is the same as it was, if not better. So we sometimes forget that last piece, and the communication piece. Do you notice that in your experience?
So the one thing that we do in the communications piece, one thing that we do in every green building project that we lead is to create an education program around it. Sometimes we apply for the innovation credit around it. Sometimes those are all filled. Irregardless, we do that. And the purpose for that is to help the person using it, gain as much, operability and benefit from that facility as possible. So this communication thing is one of those key things that you can do. When you ultimately save that $4 million plus, what it allows the National Park Service to do with their very limited budget, by the way, is do something hugely beneficial for users, right? They get to utilize that money somewhere else, and they don't have to procure it from a budget.
Yeah, they don't have to ask for like a bigger budget. They're saving enough to to say, okay, we saved you 4 million, give us 150,000 of it to do this program. It's a lot easier to get than if you're asking for the 150,000 in addition to what you've already been spending and you haven't saved anything.
Yeah, yeah. And, if it's, providing the salary for 50 people for a year was still hugely beneficial, right?
Right, right. So, question for you as to like where we've been, where we are now, and where we're going. I know, probably the nature of what you're doing, although basically there's a lot of similarities. What's the evolution been like in as far as how you looked at things 10, 15 years ago, how you're looking at them now versus what you think is going to be what you're going to be doing more of, 5, 10 years from now, as people become more aware, things become more complex, and maybe new buildings are built better, and you're not doing as much retrofitting. What do you see as kind of that evolution?
So I'm going to do like a little bit of a genealogy of it. When we started green building, people didn't believe in it. They said, you're wasting money. It's costing you more money, blah, blah, blah. We proved that the $4 extra that you invest in doing a green building and a certified LEED building gave you a return of $67. That's a 17 times return on that little delta over a span of X amount of years. Say it's 25 years, or say it's 60 years, which is the life cycle analysis we do on a building typically. That's still monumental. So all of a sudden, the bean counters couldn't say this is too expensive first cost. You're saving enough money. The ROI on what you did is very close to instant, and your long term, it's certainly so much better. So we went from doubters, and then those doubters were like, yeah, okay, maybe you got me on that one, but how is there a differentiator? Well, then we see the differentiator in the leasable dollar, like the leasable amount per square foot was much higher in a green building. Then and the main reason is the person who's signing the lease realized that their operational costs were going to be reduced in it by minimum 10%, potentially more. So when you move that money aside, instead of paying the utility, I can get a nicer place for my use and and my team's use for the equivalent dollars. I'll take the nicer one. Thank you. Then we get to a point of that whole argument around it and the ROIs on it. And every time we develop the stuff, there's a pushback, but we see the positives. And then we also see that the stuff that we started is directly affecting our building codes, our energy codes. We're seeing an increase in the level of insulation you need to provide. We're seeing an increase in the quality of windows that you need to provide. We're seeing increase in the amount of air change that you need to have, air filtration quality. All of these things that we identified in the very first green building rating system, like 30 years ago in the first release of LEED, are all now applied. And when we look at the baseload savings, how many quads of energy that we've saved as a result of improving building technology, it's just astronomical. I don't know if we're at $1 trillion yet, but we could probably be very close, or maybe we've surpassed it. I haven't looked for that. We see the same kind of corresponding stuff for wellness. When we do stuff that improves the wellness inside of a facility, and we see operational costs related to absence fall drastically. Crazy coincidence, we see productivity gains. It wasn't the intent, but we also see really great stuff around education. When we have children educated in a green building that incorporates wellness stuff, we see their scores 12 to 18% higher. It's phenomenal, And then I did a project with Los Angeles Unified School District where we validate the value of doing building envelope commissioning. We did 7 facilities, and it wasn't that the subcontractor was terrible. It wasn't that the general contractor was terrible, but we found about $500,000 of deficiencies that would have turned up as being expenses for the school district 3-4 years down the line. Now, the subcontractor was apologetic on missing these things that were, general stuff that's like industry super best practices applied along with manufacturers' recommendation and requirements. for using specific materials and materials interacting and so on. And at the end of the day, they were happy to correct this stuff. But what it did is not catch the school district by surprise in 3 years' time with undue expenses that started at $100 or $200,000 a year in year 3 of their supposedly brand new building. So, those things we're seeing as it changes. We're moving our focus into carbon and carbon impact because we see the global temperatures rising. And what do we do to abate that? Well, obviously, green buildings help in a big way. I'm getting much more involved in the carbon world. What do we do to abate it? Every time we abate a gallon of diesel, we abate 10 kilos of carbon dioxide equivalent being emitted. Every 100 gallons that we abate, we've abated a ton of carbon, right? So it adds up really, really quick. And how do we go about doing it? Well, most people were thinking, we can't make that many solar panels. And my answer is, you don't have to. We build a more effective building that's got better insulating abilities and holistically is designed and capable for the site versus your general speculative cheapest building you can build. And then, we've managed to lower the level of energy. And, one of the biggest concerns I met with a bunch of utility company providers and local governments in California in September, and we're dialoguing about this. Their biggest concern is how do they increase their capacity to deliver more energy when they don't have the access, they don't have the infrastructure, and they don't have the bandwidth to increase it much beyond where it is now. How do we do that? Well, we have to increase the effectiveness of our new buildings. Obviously, doing a net zero energy home in California is going to help contribute to that one. But the other stuff is important too. We also can address carbon emissions. The biggest carbon emitter is buildings, obviously. That's our biggest use of energy on the planet. And then next after that is transportation. How do we get better than that? And we're seeing a big move to try to get to sustainable fuels. And when we say sustainable fuels, really the impetus there is a fuel that you don't have to go through utilizing a lot of energy to extract from the planet. We can do stuff at that, above scale. In working with a bunch of agriculture people and agriculture specialists, looking at defining what needs to be done on their stuff. Believe it or not, we can abate carbon, create a fuel stock for green hydrogen, and increase the value of the land in a farming area by doing a cover crop we thought about in advance. That's all it takes. So imagine you have, 1,000 acres of land that you had, a crop on. And I'm not going to pick on corn, although I'm going to pick on corn. After you planted corn, it extracts so much nutrients from the ground, basically leave that fallow for 2 years so that it gets a chance to recover. Well, you don't till it, you don't have to turn it over. But in the case of corn, you could, but then put a cover crop on it. The cover crop is going to capture nitrogen from the environment, recharge. The cover crop can potentially sequester more than 60% of the carbon that it comes in contact with. So that CO2, it converts to use, combines that with nitrogen, recharges and re-energizes the ground for future agriculture. And that cover crop can be used to, It can be used to create a biofuel.
Wow. So let me ask you this. We're closing in on the end of our time here. Fascinating stuff. I think, to summarize what you're saying is you talked about the guy who lives in the old silo, but he doesn't think like he's a silo. And we need to think beyond silos because to get from where we were talking about.
The silo just sent me a message, Todd, by the way. So it came back.
His ears must have been ringing. But my point is that in order to make a better building, it might involve agriculture. It might involve better ways to plant corn and stuff like that. You got to think of systems beyond the little niche that you're in. And I think for us at the Spaceship, with your assistance as one of our fellows, being able to take a puzzle and and put it together with so many different pieces that come together and make this beautiful picture basically is hard to do. And that's what we're trying to do. And you have, through your career so far, really been able to go from probably you never had like a singular focus because you're a guy who does a lot of stuff, but to now where the things you are even considering and thinking about and kind of building into what you're doing for your clients and customers is 10,000 fold more than what you were doing 20 years ago,
Oh
just
yeah,
because of the
yeah.
evolution.
Yeah, it's so bizarre. Like I was doing environmentally positive work and connected to nature with my mother, with farming and growing plants and seeing the value of that. With my grandfather, who was a master carpenter, and becoming a mechanical engineer and realizing that the former automaker that I used to work with were on the wrong path and I had to go do something else. That was the moment that really, and then, I was fortunate enough to have Dennis Andreyko and Gary Day as profs when I studied architecture. And Dennis helped, the ICC develop the green building, what do you call it? The ASHRAE green building program while he was, involved as a guy with AIA. And Gary was the guy who really started to merge those connections. Not that we didn't know that there were connections. He made us realize the big connections in environmental practice correlating with building was something real. Oh, your building was having an impact on the planet. Do you want it to be negative or positive? Or do you want to be as close to neutral as you can? And
Wow.
and it was really great exposure. 30 odd years after, I'm still excited about it.
No,
It
that's
probably more
awesome.
so today because I see the impact that we can create. And as you know, one of my sayings is build for impact. Yeah, so let's keep it rolling. And,
Well,
I think here's my challenge to people who've watched this podcast. Let's get 5 key things that you are concerned about in the planet and bring them back to Todd and Craig. And I'm more than happy to come back and do a group panel podcast or field those questions and dialogue around those levels of concern. And
I love it. I
and
love it.
not necessarily solving the problem, but giving you more discussion points around helping people collaborate to bring a solution.
That's awesome. Well, that is a great place for us to stop, but that's not the end. It's been great having you on, great listening to what you have to say. I love what you're doing and how you're doing it. We are going to have you again for sure. And we're thrilled to have you as part of our very amazing crew of folks who are associated with the spaceship. Much more good stuff to come. We're barely off the launch pad, but with guys like you and some of the other men and women that we've
An
got,
amazing team.
we're going to make good things
Such an
happen.
amazing team.
Hey,
Yeah.
thank
Yeah.
you, my friend,
Thank you, my
and
friend.
I hope to see you very soon, and we'll talk again.